So we're going to be creating an ER diagram using Microsoft Word. And the 6 tables that are displayed are from steps 1 and 2 on page 330 in your book. So we're going to be basically creating these in Microsoft Word. And with the layout that was shown, it'd probably be easier to put this into landscape orientation. So I went to the layout ribbon, orientation, choosing landscape. And then to get the internal storage boxes, we need to go to the insert ribbon and select shapes. Now, if you have kind of narrowed your screen and Word is not quite as wide as normal, then you'll notice that these collapse and shapes is actually under illustrations. And I'm going to go ahead and make this bigger. And I'm going to go down to the flowchart section, and it's the internal storage box that we need to use. So I'm going to drag one. Now the problem with this box when you first bring it in is that it's filled in with blue and the text is white. So I'm going to click on this More button. And I don't really care which one you pick from the top row, but you do not want a background color and you do want black text. So I'm just going to pick this boring old first one. And I'm going to click on the border, and basically I'm going to copy and paste. So I'm going to go to Home and Copy, hit Paste, and then I'm just going to move it right next to it. Hit Paste again. We'll do that again, kind of move it down. And it does look like I have to reposition these because now I'm off the page, which is not ideal. And let me paste again. And then we'll do it one more time to get our 6th box here. So once you have the 6 internal storage boxes, then our next step is to enter the text. So we're going to enter the table name, and below that we're going to have all of our columns. So if you click on these boxes, it will let you start typing right in the box. Okay, so there's my first one. I am going to highlight customers and boldface it just so it stands out a little bit. And then I'm going to click the next box and enter the table name and all the columns. Do that for the rest. I'm going to pause the video while I'm doing all this typing. So at this point, I have all of my tables entered and I have all the columns entered. And I need to identify which columns are primary keys. And just looking through here, the very first column, the ID column, I'm going to have as unique. So I'm going to put that in as a primary key. Now, in order to connect my tables, I have to have a column that is in both of the tables. Typically, what you do is you take the primary key from one table and you place that into a second table. When you place the primary key from one into a column in your second table, it's called a foreign key, and it allows you to connect your tables. So to connect customers to the orders they placed, we're going to use the customer ID. So in our order table, that becomes a foreign key. To connect the orders to the line items, we can use orders, okay, but that's going to create a little bit of an issue for us because it's a one-to-one relationship, and chances are a customer is going to order more than one item, or we hope they'll order more than one. So order sequence can also be part of a primary key. So let's say order ID is number 100, order sequence is their first item, and then we have a separate row for their second item and a separate row for their third item. So if we combine order ID with order sequence, okay, and make those the primary key together, it then becomes unique. Okay, because even though the order ID is going to be repeated, the sequence is not. So if it's order ID with number 1, order ID with number 2, order ID with number 3, combined they are a unique key. And that will let us relate orders in order line items. It'll allow us to have a one-to-many relationship because one order can actually place many order line items. So we have a composite key in this. Okay, then looking through here, we have a shipper table, and we would like to know at the order level who is going to ship. So at this point, they have shipper address in here, which is kind of terrible because address is not unique and it's not the primary key in our shipper table. So why don't we change this to the shipper ID, and then it can become a foreign key. And that will allow us to connect these two tables. That way, if the shipper changes their address, we only have to change it here. Okay? That's why having address or anything that could possibly change as a foreign, it wouldn't be a foreign key, it would be a common field, but that's why you don't do that. You typically will place the key in another table and use that to connect because your key is not going to change. So at this point, we're going to be able to connect customers and orders, order and order line items, shippers and orders. And for employees, if we want to be able to connect employees to any of this, it would make sense to put the employee ID up on the order. Okay, so what employee placed the order? So we're going to add employee ID here. And because it's the primary key here, it becomes a foreign key in this table. So now we can identify which employee placed the order. And we'll assume it's so that we can give our employees commission instead of looking for mistakes and blame. So our last table that we don't have connected to anything is products. And where products are going to display is in the order line items. Okay? And we have product ID here, which makes perfect sense, okay, because we have the ID down here. So that can then become a foreign key. So we have connected our different tables. And let's just take a quick look to make sure we don't have any duplicate information and that we're conforming to our standards of 3NF. So for customers, the name, address, and phone all refer up to our customer. And we'll notice we're not saving city, state, and zip. We'll assume that's all with address, and that is how the client wants it. So that is a dependency that the client has prescribed and we know about. For orders, we're going to just double check. We only have one primary key. We are not going to have repeating groups here or rows. And that is because we have the line items in the separate table. That would be the area that would repeat in an order, because you can have multiple items. So looking at this, the employee who placed the order, the shipping date of the order, the shipper, the date it was ordered, and the customer who placed the order, those are all directly related to the order number. So it is in 3NF. And we look at order line items. We've got the order sequence, which definitely pertains to what they ordered. The product ID does relate to both the order number and the sequence, because if they ordered multiple items, they're going to have different product IDs. The quantity also relates to the order sequence and the order ID. So both of those are dependent on both of our keys. Now the problem here is that unit price is in two places. That is a huge problem, okay? We don't want that in two places, because what if the price changes? So it doesn't really make sense to have it up here. So we're going to get rid of it. Okay? It makes more sense to have the unit price with the product that the price is for. Okay? Because the unit price really doesn't have a whole lot to do with the actual line item. It's more about the product. Okay? So unit price really affected product ID more. Quantity does not, because quantity is associated with what they ordered, okay? Whereas the unit price is associated with strictly with the product. So that's why we are removing unit price from here. And we do need to connect the product table now to our order line items. And that is done through product ID, which we've already identified as a foreign key. So let's just come down here and make sure that everything that we have in products is related to the product ID. So the name does go with the ID. Quantity per unit. So that might be quantity in stock, which would relate to the product. Unit price does. Now here we have in stock. Okay, so quantity per unit might be things like batteries. Okay, so if we have batteries packaged, you don't just buy one. You'd have a quantity of 4, 12, 16. So that's how we're interpreting that. And on order and in stock all relate to the product, whether we can sell it or not. Then if we look at employees, so basically product is in 3NF. And for employees, we would not have repeating rows. We would not have any repeating groups. And hire date, social security, last name and first name are all related to a single employee. So this is in 3NF. And for shipper, if we look at name, address, and phone, these are all also related to the shipper ID. And the only thing that we could do a little different here, and again, this would depend on business practice and what the owner of the business prefers. But customer and shipper both have address in them. So a little better design on this would actually be to have a zip code table. And so we are going to go ahead and set that up because that is a better way to do this. So I'm going to copy customer and we'll paste it. And we're going to call this thing zip code. And so our zip code is going to be our primary key. And then we're going to just have city, state, and we'll even put in country here. Oops, hopefully spell it right. All right, so in Shipper, we're going to make the address just a street address. And then we'll put in a zip code. We'll make that a foreign key. And we're going to do the same thing here up in customer. This is the proper way to set this up. All right, so now we have gotten rid of the transitive dependency because city and state and country are all dependent on zip code, and they really have nothing to do with customer ID or shipper ID. Okay? If the zip code changes, it means a different city, state, or country. Okay, so that really should be pulled out. So now we have every single table in 3NF. Okay, so we don't have any repeating rows or repeating groups. So we are in 1NF. 2NF is basically all of your columns are dependent on your primary key. So when you only have a single primary key, then you're pretty much automatically in 2NF. So the only one that we had to be concerned about was order line items. So the product that we have is dependent on both, and so is the quantity. So those all are in 2NF, and then 3NF got into transitive dependencies, which means that each column must be dependent on the key, and it cannot be dependent on any other column. And that is why we pulled zip code out. Okay, zip code, city, state, country, these three are dependent on the zip code. When we had that information in address, they were not dependent on the customer ID. And when we had it down here in shipper, those three columns were not dependent on shipper ID either. So at this point, we do have everything in 3NF, and we can move on to actually relating our different tables. And you have to set up primary keys and foreign keys before you can do the relationships. The relationships are just basically a physical line showing which column connects between the tables. So we're connecting our primary keys to the foreign keys is basically what we're doing. So I'm going to go to Insert and Shapes and turn on line. So for customers, I'm connecting this primary key to the foreign key. So I'm just going to drag a line. And then for my customers and my zip code, it's the primary key and zip code that is connecting. So turn on my line again. And for this one, I'm actually going to drag out, turn on my line, drag up, turn on my line, and drag over. Now, if you ever need to modify these, you just click on the line and you can drag the ending. Okay, so you've got little resize handles on these that let you, you can really move these guys around if you want, but you can move them and resize them. Okay, so I've got those connecting, I've got this connecting. Might as well go ahead and connect zip code to the shipper zip code. And you'll notice when you're doing these lines that you have to click on the line tool each time. And if you want to do a super straight line, you can press Shift while you're dragging. All right, so we've got these connected to each other. Now let's take a look at orders. So we can connect the shipper ID from orders to shipper. So let's do that little connecting line here. And then we're going to need to connect the employee to the order as well. So I'm going to do another one of these fun 3-line connectors. Okay, so we've got shipper, employee. That looks pretty good. To connect the orders and the order line items, we're going to do that on order ID. And then to connect our products up to the order line items, it's going to be on product ID. And so I'm just going to go ahead and I'll do an awkward looking 2-line one. There we go. So once you get those connector lines in, now we have to identify which one in the relationship is the one table and which one is the many. So we're going to have to go to Insert and insert a text box. And we're going to pick the first simple box and we're just going to type a 1. And we are going to resize this. And we're going to have to change a couple things because if you click away, you'll notice there's a border on that. So I'm going to click on it. And this is a move handle at the bottom that lets you move it around. I'm going to click on the move handle and I'm going to get rid of the shape outline. And there's also a white fill behind that. So I'm going to go ahead and get rid of the shape fill. And so now I can move it right up next to the primary key. And I'm going to copy and paste and move the new one next to the next primary key that has a relationship. And I'm going to paste again. And let's move it. Try pasting again. There it is. I'm going to move that next to, actually not order. I'm going to move it right down here. Come on, mouse. Moving that next to my product ID. We'll paste. Moving one here. And finally, I've got the last one over here. Now, I didn't put one next to order ID because this is a composite key. So in this relationship, this is not going to be a 1 relationship. The order items is going to be a many. Okay, so I'm just putting the 1 next to the primary keys where it is the 1 in the relationship. So I do see I need one more. So I'm going to paste. And we'll just put the 1 in there one time for both of those. As it happens, zip code is the 1 table for this relationship and for this one where I've got awkward lines. We'll quick fix those. All right, good enough. What I'm going to do is paste again to get the box because now I need the infinity symbol for the many. So I'm just going to put it right here and highlight the number 1. And if I go into the insert ribbon on the far right side, I have symbols. What I want is this infinity symbol. Chances are you're not going to have it in here. So if you go into more symbols, you should be looking at normal text. And it's quite a ways down. Okay, so if you see things that look like pool table balls with numbers, it's right above that section. So I'm going to double click and that replaces the 1 with the infinity symbol. Now I can close and I'm going to position that next to my foreign key because your foreign key is definitely going to be the many in the relationship. And I'm going to copy and paste. So I need one next to customer here. I need one next to shipper. I need one next to employee ID. I don't need any in zip code. I need one down here in shippers. I don't need any in employees and products. And I am going to need one over in orders. So order ID is going to be kind of a weird field because it's the primary key in this table. It's part of a composite, but it's also a foreign key. So we're just going to do an FK here, just to indicate that in this relationship between orders and order line items, it's actually the foreign key. So now we have all of these relationships defined. And at this point, we're done with this diagram. Now, the reason that defining these relationships is really important is because when you're creating tables, after the tables are created with the primary keys, you have to tell SQL what the foreign keys are. And that's called a constraint. So you have to know what they are. And then when you're ready to enter data, and this is critical, any table that has a one relationship, so employees and products and zip codes, okay, they only have ones, those tables have to have data in them first. So you have to enter the data in those tables first, and then you can add the data to the related table. So I would have to do zip code before I can add shippers and customers. Okay, so once I've entered everything in zip code, I can add the shippers and I can add the customers. I have to add all of my products before I can put them into order line items. I have to add all of my employees before they can place an order. I can't have an employee who doesn't exist place an order. So this affects how you're going to enter the data. So you would enter data into zip code, employees, and products first. Then you would do customers and shippers. Once you have employees, shippers, and customers entered, you can add orders. Okay, because at that point, you're going to have data for the foreign keys. Once you have orders and you have products, then you can enter ordered line items. So this table would be done last. Okay? Orders would be second to last. Okay? That's why these relationships are important. Okay? So at this point, you are done with the exercise.